I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, join us on a heartwarming journey through the remarkable life of Cameron, a typical Aussie kid with an exceptional connection to the spiritual realm in One of the King's Men. We will follow his adventures and misadventures with pride, laughter, and gratitude. It's a beautiful book. It's written by his mother, Estelle Everingham, and we are delighted to have Estelle back in the spotlight with us today. We thank the folks at Prime 7 Media for helping us put Estelle in the spotlight and ask those watching to support writers like her by subscribing to our channel. Estelle, thanks again for being our guest.
Thank you very much, Logan. Thank you for your lovely, kind words. And I'm ready to speak to you and your audience this morning.
Wonderful, wonderful. You're joining us from Australia. It's early in the morning
Yes.
there, not too early, fortunately. So I'm
No.
glad about that. Tell the folks at home a little bit about your son, Cameron. He lived a short life, but he touched
Yes.
a lot of lives and touched a lot of hearts and made a difference. Tell us about Cameron. Let's get reacquainted with him.
Well, Cameron was really a unique child right from the time he was born, because the doctors had told me before his birth that he had had no heartbeat or pulse for 13 hours, and therefore he was obviously deceased within the womb. And they had no way, because of my medical conditions, of getting him out. There was no way to try and save his life because they were sure he was dead, and all they could do was try and save mine. So they had intended to remove him piece by piece, which I found absolutely horrifying. I didn't know anybody ever did that, never mind to me or to him.
Right.
And just before he was about to be cut up and removed in pieces, he was born. My
Mm.
husband had gone to ring up the men at church who were, excuse me, having their prayer breakfast that morning, and he asked them if they would pray for the birth of this child and for him to be born safely, regardless of the fact that we'd been told he was dead.
Mm.
Anyway, as soon as my husband returned to the birthing suite, Cameron was born. There he was, all 10 pound, 2.5 ounces of him,
Wow.
not breathing, cord around his neck 3 times, sort of upside down, inside out, round the wrong way, every way you can be except the correct way. But much to the amazement of the nurses, who almost dropped him because they weren't expecting anybody to be born, they were
Right.
just expecting the doctor to cut up this baby. Much to their amazement and ours, of course, they took the baby away, unwrapped the cord from around his neck, gave him a bit of oxygen, brought him in, and announced that I had a son who appeared to be a healthy son. And yes, healthy he was. He was also amazing in that his first sentence that he ever said came when he was 11 months old. He didn't just mutter away in the corner somewhere. He was up in his high chair and he tapped the tray of his high chair with a spoon, got everybody's attention, and declared, "God's not dead." And I thought, well, that's interesting. We'll see what he does during his life to prove that God's not dead. He ended up living his entire life proving that God's not dead. His next amazing thing, well, he had other various things that he did on a daily basis, but the thing that astonished me the most was when he was 3 years old and came out of his bedroom, and he's standing there next to me in his pajamas, and he said, "Mum, why do they do the pictures of Jesus with the nail prints there and there," pointing to his palms, but saying, "They're not there, Mum. Really, they are here and here," pointing
Mm.
to his wrists. And I thought, now, he's 3 years old. How's he going to know that? So I said, "Are they, Cameron? How do you know?" And he said, "When Jesus was in my room last night and he held out his hands and he smiled at me, I saw them. They are there and there." Well,
Mhm.
I mean, what can you say to that boy? He knew where they were. He saw them. Then came the time not long before he died, 9 or 10 months before he died, when he was 13, he said to me, "Mum, this getting prayed for stuff at church just doesn't work." And I'm thinking to myself, well, you'd be the last of my 3 kids I'd expect to hear that from.
Mm.
And I said, "Why, what's happening?" And he said, "Mum, I've been prayed for 3 times for insomnia and I still can't sleep." So I said, well, why can't you sleep? He said, I can't sleep for the light. So I'm thinking, oh, well, he could do with some dark curtains. Maybe that will solve the problem. So my friend made up some lovely dark navy blue curtains for his room. And the first morning after he'd had a night with the curtains, I went in to get him up for school and I couldn't even see him. It was so dark in there. It was like a cave. And I said, Cameron, Cameron, where are you? Oh, I'm here, Mum, he says. So I said, now, Cameron, don't tell me you couldn't sleep. Please don't tell me you couldn't sleep. He said, Mum, I couldn't sleep. And I said, well, it won't be for the light. It's like a cave in here. He said, Mum, I couldn't sleep for the light. I said, Cameron, what are you talking about? There's no light coming in at all. It's very, very dark. And he said, Mum, when Jesus is in your room all night, he fills it with light and he
Wow.
fills it with power, and you just can't sleep. So that was Cameron. That was his life. That was what we were used to with Cameron. It was always something about angels, heaven, Jesus, visitations during the night, wise words that he'd come up with from his friend Sonia, who I imagined was a little girl because Sonia is normally a girl's name. Well, no, Sonia turned out to be, as Cameron said to me, Mum, doesn't everybody have a guardian angel that they can see and talk to? And I said, well, no, not usually. And he said, well, that's who Sonia is. Sonia's my guardian angel. Sonia's been talking to me just all the time, right from when I was tiny, he said. So after he was killed, I looked up the meaning of Sonia in a baby book and found that it means wisdom. And I
Wow.
thought, wow, Sonia has been imparting to Cameron heaven's wisdom from the day of his birth, probably from before his birth even. So that was Cameron's life. Yeah,
Amazing.
just
He was
remarkable.
so connected to God
Yes,
and to Jesus
yes, yes,
at a
absolutely.
extremely young age. And you were in a
Yes,
particularly religious family, right? You were normally religious. It wasn't like he was being fed this. It was
yeah.
coming out of him. It was his encounters, it was his connection, right?
Yeah, well, we went to church all the time, but nobody at church had these experiences.
Right.
Nobody ever got up and said, this happens at our place. This was the first time we'd encountered such a thing. So Cameron wasn't sort of taught that this was a kind of a normal way to behave. And we weren't either. I mean, my father was a minister, but never, ever, ever in his church did anything even remotely like this ever happen. And, we went to church, but other people certainly didn't have the experiences Cameron did. He just
Mm.
had some kind of a blessing on his life, something that he was born with and something that he lived out with great joy and great excitement all the time. He just had this thing about heaven and going home to heaven,
Right.
always considered heaven his home, and as though he was kind of on holidays here. Well, I guess he was kind of lent to us, I suppose. But that's not to say we're not looking forward to seeing him again in heaven,
Yeah.
because my goodness, I intend to have a reunion with him that will shake the planet. Oh, yes.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
That'll be a happy day for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, as I recall from when we spoke last, Cameron had a bunch of special abilities, one of which he was a very fast runner, I believe, also, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Tell us
He was
about
running.
that aspect of his life, which was kind of his middle life. He was quite young, but that was kind of his middle years, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We first noticed his leg muscles when they were pointed out to us by somebody at the daycare centre, which he attended the year before he started school. So he was only 4 years old, and all the children at the daycare centre, unbeknownst to us until it had happened, had been taken for a roller skating lesson or
Mm.
to visit the roller skating rink. And none of the children, none of the 4-year-olds could skate at all, except Cameron. They
Mm.
said, oh, has Cameron had lots of lessons before in roller skating? They said, we were looking at him zooming around there and looking at his leg muscles, never seen anything like the leg muscles on this 4-year-old. I said, no, he's never had a pair of skates on in his life. I thought I'd better check out his leg muscles too. Well, I had the opportunity to do that the year later when he did start the first year in grade 1 at school. I was teaching at that school, and it was going to be an event whereby the children in grades 5, 6, and 7 were all going to do a cross-country race, not the grade 1s or 2s or 3s or 4s, just those in 5, 6, and 7. And I was teaching a class that was half grade 5 and half grade 6. So I would take my class down to the track that they were going to race on every morning for 3 months, as did the other teachers with their classes. And these children could practice for the big day. Well, when the big day came, all the grade 5s, all the grade 6s, all the grade 7s, and one little grade 1 boy, Cameron, of course, were there ready to race. I'm not quite sure what he thought he was doing there. His class had never been on the track, never raced. He didn't have his racing shoes on. He just had his ordinary black lace-up school shoes, but he had put himself in the race. I don't even know to this day where his teacher thought he was. But anyway, when the race happened, off they went. The other children were all very accustomed to how the track went and everything. Cameron had never been on it. And when the race was over, he was beaten by, I think it was 10 grade 7 children who
Wow.
were 12 years old. He was 5. He
Wow.
beat all the grade 5s and all the grade 6s and most of the grade 7s. So he came 11th in a race that was meant for children aged 10 to 12, and he was 5. So I think we
Amazing.
kind of got the idea, because I was hoping that he'd find his niche somewhere,
Yeah.
because my eldest child is brilliant. She does excellently, or has done excellently at school and in life. My second child is very creative with his hands, very good with his mind, very good with all things mechanical, electrical, all of those sorts of things. In fact, he's just totally torn to pieces the inside of a large house and rebuilt it right through. I said to him,
Wonderful.
"Boy, you must be clever, because you're not a carpenter or a builder." I said, "You must be smart." He said, "No, Mum, I'm not smart. I'm stupid. I absolutely wore myself to pieces." But he'll make a couple of million on that. He's done
Amazing.
so well. He's a multi-millionaire in his own right. But then there was Cameron, and what could Cameron do well? Yes, Cameron could walk and talk in the spirit realm, but he
Mhm.
didn't really have a niche of his own, certainly not an academic one, and I can't really see him doing anything at all like his big brother Toddy did. But here we were. He had found his niche. His leg muscles gave him the position of, when he was killed, he was running state times in 50 metres, 100 metres, 200, 400, 800, 1500, 3K, 5K, 8K, and he was the cross-country champion and a champion cyclist.
Amazing.
So when he did tell me that he didn't have long to live, I knew there was nothing wrong with him physically. He could outrun just about anybody that came near him. So, yeah, that was
Amazing.
Cameron's sort of pride and joy. And he became one of the sports captains, not at the primary school, but later on at a different school. They made him sports captain, and he could round up all the other kids. Mind you, he was in most of the races himself. If he couldn't get enough participants, then he'd just go in himself. He even swam and went in swimming races, even though he knew that at the end of the race he'd have to be hoisted out of the water and taken off and treated for asthma.
Mm.
He still dived in and did his bit. So he led a very full life, very much with one foot in heaven, but very much also a kid on earth, a little Aussie boy. That was
Exactly.
Cameron. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, he enjoyed his time here. He
Oh, he
looked
loved it.
forward to his time with our Heavenly Father, but he enjoyed his time
Absolutely.
here, almost like
Yes.
Jesus himself. I mean, Jesus
Yes.
enjoyed all of the things that humans do. And that's
Yes.
why, it was painful for Jesus to die, even though he knew he was going to heaven and dying for us.
Yes.
So I do see parallels between Cameron's story and the story of Jesus for sure. And I don't
Yes.
think they're coincidental at all. I think
No.
it's quite an amazing
One
story.
one thing that I might mention to you that I don't think I mentioned before was that, as in the Bible, where Mary was told to take note of all the things that Jesus did from his babyhood and to hide them in her heart. God told me to do the same with Cameron, and I did, which was just as well, because when I came to write the book, I had all of those memories there, and I could remember all the conversations with or about Cameron, word for word, that I would need to put in the book, because Jesus told me when he was one, just like Mary did, you remember and hide all the things in your heart that you hear from Cameron. So I did, fortunately.
Right.
Yes.
This book you've written is certainly a gift to anyone who reads it because it's faith renewing and life affirming. But I also think
Yes.
it was a tremendous gift to you as well, in that you had
Yes.
this connection with Cameron while writing it, reliving his life, recalling the stories, the anecdotes,
Yes.
the connections. That must have been a wonderful time while writing that book. It was like
It
spending
was.
time
It
with
was.
Cameron again, right?
Yes, it was like spending the 5 weeks that it took me to write the book. It was like spending 5 weeks with Cameron all over again. Yes, and with my other
Amazing.
two children, who are mentioned quite,
Yeah.
frequently in the book, because obviously they had the family ties and were there for much of the time that Cameron was doing what Cameron was doing.
Yeah.
So yes, yeah.
And
So,
Cameron was determined to get baptized by the end of his life
oh,
as well.
oh
Tell the folks
yes,
at home
yes,
about that, because I found that to be such an interesting part of his story and your story and the story of your family.
yes, it was. We were on holidays up at the Sunshine Coast at the time, just a little, I think it was 3 nights and 4-day break before Cameron would begin at the Christian school that he had asked to attend instead of going to the local state high school. So we were having a little break there, and it came the Sunday afternoon. We were expecting to go home on the Monday the next day, but Cameron said to me that he really thought we should go home then on Sunday. And I said, oh, well, Cameron, we're going home tomorrow. It's all right. We've only got one more night and then we'll all be going home. It's okay. And he said, oh, no, Mum, no, I need to go home. We've got to go today. And normally Cameron didn't argue with me about anything. If I said no about something, he took that as no, and that was all right. But this time he said, Mum, I really need to go home today. And I said, well, what's the big rush? What are you in such a hurry to get home for? And he
Mm.
said, Mum, they're having baptisms at church tonight, and I haven't been baptized in water, and I really want to be baptized. So I said to him, well, that's very good. Yes, they are having baptisms, but you know that the pastor has baptisms about every 6 to 8 weeks. So how about we go home tomorrow and we make sure we see the pastor during the week and get your name down on the list to be baptized next time? Oh, he said, I really think I need to get baptized today.
Mm.
And at that point, I didn't know. And I'm assuming he didn't actually really know that he didn't have another Sunday left. He didn't have another Sunday afternoon, or he wouldn't be able to go to the Sunday night meeting next week, never mind in 6 weeks,
Yeah.
because he was going to die the next Sunday, unbeknownst to me.
Right.
Even though he just told me he didn't have long to live, I didn't expect it was going to be 1 week to the minute. So off he went into the unit where his father was lying down with a migraine. And we were always very careful not to interrupt father when he was lying down with a migraine. You were always very careful not to interrupt father full stop, but especially not if he had a migraine. So I thought, well, Cameron must really, really want to be baptized if he's willing to risk father's ire at being disturbed when he's lying there in pain. So I'm waiting for, an explosion to come from the unit, but no, out they came, the two of them, each in board shorts and each with a towel. And I was informed by my husband that he was intending to baptise Cameron in one of the swimming pools at the resort that we were staying at. And so I was invited to come and observe this spectacle, which I was definitely going to do. So off I went and followed them. And my husband said, well, there probably won't be anybody at the third swimming pool. The other two are closer and most people go to those. So we went to swimming pool number 3, and indeed it was empty, which
Mm.
was very nice. So my husband had the thrill and pleasure of baptizing Cameron on Cameron's last Sunday on earth. And Cameron was just so excited that his father would baptize him. And after that, he didn't worry about if we didn't go home ever,
Right.
really. He just wanted to be baptized. That was a big deal to Cameron, and he got that wish, for which I'm thankful.
And it's wonderful that his father got to do it. I mean, it's one thing to get
Yes,
baptized in a church, and that has meaning,
yes,
but there's something
yes,
about the personal experience of having your own dad dip you in the water that's quite
yes,
beautiful for sure. And I'm
yes.
sure it sticks with your husband till this day.
Oh, it does. It does to this day. Yeah. My husband was the lead trumpet player at church, the church that we were going to then for 40 years,
Mhm.
but he never got to baptize anybody, much less his own son.
Right.
So that was a real thrill for him, and something that it actually brings him to tears when he reads the book and
I'm sure.
and reads about, how he was able to do that for Cameron, and how thrilled Cameron was at being baptized on his last Sunday. Yes, very, very
Absolutely.
good, very touching. Absolutely.
Do you want to tell the folks at home about Cameron's last day, or do you want to save that for the book?
Oh,
Readers?
no, I'm happy to tell them about Cameron's
Okay.
last day. Yes, yes. When Cameron was up on holidays with me before the baptism, about half an hour before the baptism, he had said to me while he was in the spa with me, Mum, I haven't got long to live. And it wasn't like, I think I'm going to die.
Right.
He was quite thrilled about the fact, Mum, I haven't got long to live, and he went through his life and forgave people for things they'd done to him, and planned how he wanted his funeral, and he was all excited about that. And I was thinking, well, hopefully he means he's not going to live to be kind of 95 or 100, a really old man. Maybe he'll live to be more in the 60s or whatever, something like that. And then I won't have to wait long in heaven, and Cameron will arrive, and that'll be nice. Well, no, when he said he didn't have long to live, he was exactly right, because he was killed 1 week later to the minute in a car accident in which our other son, who was then 18 years old, was the driver. And that's been
Mm.
just horrible. But the day that Cameron was killed, we went to church, and after church we had to wait for Cameron because he was talking to the pastor, and we didn't find out for a couple of days that Cameron had said to the pastor, I want to be a preacher, Clark. Can
Mhm.
you show me how to get started? And Clark Taylor, our pastor, had said to Cameron, will you be at the meeting on Wednesday night, Cameron? Cameron said, oh, yes, I'll come along. And Clark said, well, on Wednesday, I'll bring all my notes. And even though you're 14, you want to be a preacher, so we'll get you started. But on Wednesday, Clark buried him. So that
Mm.
was a very unexpected thing. But that was Cameron's last request on earth, as far as we're aware, which
Mm.
is pretty jolly good. I want to be a
Yeah.
preacher. Can you show me how to get started? And the next thing, not too much longer after that, he's standing in heaven. But on the day that he was killed, we were about to have lunch, and Cameron had been expecting to be riding his push bike in the afternoon, his mountain cycle, because he trained. He used to ride 100 kilometres every weekend, and he hadn't done his 100-kilometre ride. But on the way home from church, his father had stopped at the bike shop because Cameron had noticed that there was a piece broken on his bike. And he said, well, Dad, if you'll stop and get that piece for me and we can get it fixed, I'll go for my ride. And when his father had stopped at the bike shop, they said, no, we don't have that part in stock. We'll get it later in the week. So Cameron wasn't able to go riding. So he said, oh, well, that's all right. I'll just go jogging instead. So off went Cameron. He was jogging. We were having our lunch. Cameron's lunch was on the end of the table waiting for his return from his jog.
Mm.
And we saw the car belonging to Toddy, our son Toddy's friend, go driving out past where we were sitting. We couldn't see whether Toddy was driving it or whether his friend was driving it. And it transpired that it was Toddy. We hoped it wasn't when it all happened, but it was Toddy who was driving it. And they had gone out and just down the road, and they'd only been gone about, not even a minute, when my husband said to me as we sat at the table having our lunch, "Can you hear those sirens?" he said. And I said, "No, I can't hear any sirens. What sort of sirens are they?" And he said, "I can hear police sirens, I can hear ambulances, and I can also hear fire engines." And I looked out the window and said to him, "It's raining a little bit. It's not going to be a bushfire." And he said, "Oh, I hope it's not the boys that are just driven out, Toddy and his friend, his mate." He said, "I'll just go down to the corner, because if it was them, they can have only got to the corner. That's as far as they can have got. And with all of those sirens sounding, it sounds as though there's been a car accident." So he got in the car, but he said to me first, I'll go down and I'll ring you up and I'll let you know if it's the boys. And if it is, you write a note for Cameron. And when he comes home to have his lunch, he'll at least know that we've gone to the hospital. He'll know where we are. It'll be all right." So off he went, and I waited there by the phone. And that was kind of the longest 3 minutes of my life, I think, when the phone rang and he said, "Yes, it's Glenn's car. It's smashed all over the road. The ambulance officers are working on Toddy. They've got a thing around his neck and they're checking him as though they've got a brace. It's as though he's maybe hurt his neck or his back, and it seems as though he might have a broken arm." He said, "But before I come home," he said, "I'll go and check the car, because somebody in the crowd had said that there was a passenger who was Tony's friend Glenn, who was trapped in the car." He said, "I'll just go and make sure Glenn's all right, and then I'll be home. You write a note for Cameron." But I just didn't feel to write a note for Cameron, so I didn't. And the next thing, my husband comes in, and he was just white as a sheet. His whole face was white, grey even. And I looked at him and I thought, "Oh dear, something awful's happened." The thing that ran through my mind was, perhaps Toddy's lost a leg or something. That'd be just terrible. And my husband just looked at me and said, "Cameron's dead. Cameron's dead. Cameron's dead." And I said, "What do you mean Cameron's dead? Cameron's jogging. How can Cameron be dead?" Cameron wasn't even in the car as far as we knew. And my husband then went on to tell me that while he was making his way through the crowd of onlookers to go and make sure that Glenn was all right, he heard somebody in the crowd talking about the blonde boy dead on the back seat. And he said, "The only really blonde boy I know is Cameron." And he said, "It can't be Cameron. Cameron's jogging." But when he got near the car, he could see Cameron's shirt. And yes, Cameron was dead on the back seat. So my husband opened the back door of the car. I don't know quite what he was going to do, but he opened the door and he said, "It was just as well I was still hanging onto the handle of the car door, because," he said, "the piece that rose up out of the car just like that," he said, "it nearly knocked me flat on my back." He said, "If I hadn't have been hanging onto the door handle, I would have been lying in the middle of the road." And he said he heard a voice from above his right side saying, "It's all right, Dad. Nobody can hurt me now. I'm okay. It's all right. I'm okay, Dad." And I mean, that can't have been anybody but Cameron. So that was just, that was very memorable for my husband also. And so when I found out that this had happened, and my husband said, "We can't go in the ambulance to the hospital with Toddy. They're taking him shortly, but we'll need to go and follow the ambulance, go in our car." He said, "You need to come down to the accident scene." So I went down there with him, and I was standing in the middle of the road, hanging onto a policeman lest I collapse in the middle of the road, because I had thought to myself, well, Toddy's injured. They're working on Toddy, but Cameron, who's supposed to be jogging, is dead on the back seat of the car. I thought, I'm going to go down there and see if I can locate Cameron's spirit anywhere, because I was so in tune with his spirit after having 14 years with him. I thought, if I can locate his spirit, I'll tell it to get back in his body and Cameron to jump up and stand up and be Cameron again, instead of lying dead in the back seat of the car. So I'm trying to locate where Cameron's spirit was, and I could not. It was gone. It was completely just not there. It wasn't at the scene. And I'm standing there being a bit confused about that, as I knew I'd look a bit silly trying to
Right.
resurrect my son, but I was willing to suffer that
Sure.
foolishness.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find his
Anything to
spirit.
bring him back, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then God showed me, just was just like a clap of thunder, like bang. God showed me again what he had showed me 2 nights before on the Friday night at church. I'm not in the habit of seeing visions, but that Friday night, God showed me a vision of my mother, two of
Mm.
my brothers, my nephew, and a dog. My
Mm.
nephew had a hold of a dog. In heaven, and they were all waiting there, standing there in a row with their hands up, as though, they were very aware of Jesus being present and so forth. God showed me that vision again. Just for a split second, I saw them again, and I heard God's audible voice say to me, they were his welcoming committee.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, if heaven was standing at attention on Friday night, waiting for Cameron to come, who am I to call him back? It was obviously no surprise to God, to Jesus, to these various relatives of mine. I don't know about the dog, but it,
Mm.
it was no surprise to heaven that Cameron was coming, and he was due to come. So if they had heaven ready for Cameron on Friday night, who am I to call him back? My place isn't to say, you've got to be here. My place is to say, all right, God, you know what you're doing. You're taking my son. I hope he has a wonderful time there, and I know he will, because that's the only place he's ever really wanted to be. He
Right.
was always talking about going home to heaven, and now he had gone home. My problem then was
Right.
having to tell this to Toddy. So
Right.
that was a whole other thing. He was just deeply affected
Of
by it,
course.
deeply, deeply. But you know, Cameron's life was amazing. Cameron's death was amazing, and the influence on people that Cameron's life has brought and is bringing is just such a blessing. I'm reminded of the Bible verse that talks about, unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it's in the ground, it can bring forth a harvest. And it's
Mm.
like Cameron's sort of like the first fruits of a harvest,
Right.
simply because he went home to heaven, which is where he wanted to be. So praise God. We
Praise
know
God.
where he is. And as he said, nobody can hurt him ever again.
Yeah.
Yep, that's my boy.
This incredible story is documented in a wonderful book. It's called One of the King's Men. It is written by Estelle Everingham. It is the story of her son's short life on Earth. His name was Cameron. He led a remarkable life. He was, in many ways, just a typical Aussie kid. In other
Yep,
ways, he was an extraordinary conduit to God and to the Lord Jesus Christ. He's given us all a glimpse into heaven, given us a glimpse into what faith can do. And I think by reading this book, you'll find your faith renewed. Estelle, great to speak with you again. God bless you and your family. I know in my heart you'll be reunited with Cameron one day
yes,
when the time is right. And these are times of faith. And I think that's one gift that Cameron has left behind to us, and that is faith.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I found that when Cameron was killed, because it was just such a horrific time in my life, I found, not really to my surprise, but definitely to my comfort and my thankfulness, that God carried me. He just carried me through it
Yeah.
all. It wasn't like I didn't feel the pain of it, or I didn't have to walk through it. I did, and I
Right.
had to lead the whole rest of the family through it
Yeah.
successfully, hopefully. Um,
Exactly.
but but I wouldn't have been able to do that without the grace of God. And I
Amen.
know where Cameron is. I know what he's doing. He's not sitting around on a cloud looking all holy and sanctimonious at all. He is often on assignment, and I can often sort of, and my husband too can often feel his presence,
Yeah.
feel his spirit, and we know when he's around, and things happen when he's around, even though we thought that, well, when he's dead, he's going to go to heaven, he's going to stay there. Not in your life. No, Cameron is leading a really full life in heaven, just as he did on earth. And it
Wonderful.
surprises the life out of us. It's not something you ever really get used to, but it's something you're thankful for and grateful for. And you really can walk through it and come out the other side and be thankful to God for all that he's done because of Cameron's life. I mean, the little boy who was expected to be born in pieces,
Right.
no, just,
That
yeah,
wasn't his destiny. That wasn't his
no,
destiny. No.
not at all.
Yep.
No.
He led a beautiful life. He has a beautiful mom. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Estelle.
You are more than welcome. And I hope that Cameron's life story touches the hearts of many, many people, because when I'm gone, it'll be what's in the book that people will remember about Cameron, except those people who actually knew him and walked with him and talked with him face to face during his short life. But there's some of Cameron's awards for his running. He's got
Okay.
all these things that he won.
Wonderful.
And also on the back here, at the state high school, he had two art lessons.
Hmm.
The 2 weeks that he was there before we had the holiday, and then he went to the private school, the Christian school, and he drew this. And I said, "Tell me about it, Cameron." He said, "Well, that's Jesus's cross." And I said, "What's this over here?" And he said, "I drew one drop of Jesus' blood," because he
Mm,
said, "Mum, one drop of Jesus' blood is powerful enough to cleanse the entire world." That
wonderful.
was his first art lesson,
That's so
week
nice
one.
that you have
Week
that.
Yes, week two, he drew this. And I said, "Oh, that's very good, Cameron. What's that all about?" And he said, "Mum, that's exactly what the art teacher said." And he told me, down here, this is the earth down here, and up here, this is heaven. He said, "Heaven's a
Mm,
planet, and this is like an arrow going up from earth to heaven. And when it's your turn to go to heaven, because of the power of the one drop of Jesus' blood, that that drop, the power of that drop knocks the evil out of the way and knocks the demonic forces on their side, and you just go straight through. Nothing can stop you. You go
wonderful.
from earth to heaven because of the power of that one drop of Jesus' blood." And I
Amazing.
thought, well, okay, I think I might keep those. So
I'm
there they
glad you
are.
did.